Hello, and welcome to the BYU Family History Library webinar series. We're glad you could join us today. If you have technical difficulties during the webinar, please use the chat box and I can address your concerns. Our next webinar will be on July 7th with James Baker on getting the most out of my heritage DNA. And for today's webinar, we'll be holding a live question and answer session with Kathryn Grant. When you have questions, please type them in the chat box or the Q&A box, and Kathryn will address them as they come in. And a little bit about Kathryn. After years on the sidelines, Kathryn began doing family history. Somewhat to her surprise, she discovered that she loved it. Her specialty is helping new family historians find success and maybe even avoid some of the mistakes she's made. Kathryn teaches Sunday classes at the BYU Family History Library and presents at other family history events. Her column on family history ran in the Nauvoo Times for about a year and is still available online. In addition, she's a regular contributor to the Family Search blog. Kathryn works as a technical writer and instructional designer with a focus on usability and process improvement. Her current work assignment includes developing training used on mobile devices. Besides family history, she loves uplifting music, thought-provoking books, and the 4th of July. And Kathryn, if you're ready, we'll turn over the time over to you.
Great. Anna, thank you so much. So I will just share my screen here. Okay, we should be good to go. If you can't see the screen, just let Anna know and she can help with that. But let's go ahead and dive in. Hey, everybody, it is so good to be with you today. And you know what? I'm trying to get I'm trying to get in full screen mode and it is not working. Give me just a second here. There we go. Okay. Hey, everybody, welcome to our Q&A webinar today. We're so happy to have you with us. And I always love doing these webinars, the Q&As, because the questions that people have are so interesting and relevant to family history. And we're actually doing this at our viewers' request because every time we do one of these, people say, "Oh, we love this. We hope that you'll do one again." So, back by popular demand, we're doing our Q&A today. We did have a form ahead of time where people could submit questions, and I went ahead and picked 5 questions that seemed pretty broadly applicable. But as Anna said, we also welcome questions to be asked during this webinar. And so what I'd like to do, if it's okay with you guys, is to go through those 5 questions first and then spend the rest of the time on any questions that are submitted by our participants today. So these are the questions that are on the docket. Somebody asked if you could search Family Search historical records by role. And then we got 2 questions about problems with sources. We got a question about duplicates. And then finally, a question that probably a lot of people can relate to. How do you get started again after you've been away from family history for a while? So let's go ahead and dive in. As I mentioned, we want to take your questions as well. And so for that reason, I wanted to mention the type of questions that we're looking for. We want questions about FamilySearch.org or general questions about family history. The type of question we're not looking for so much in this webinar is a question or questions about specific research. So for example, a question such as, how do I do a merge, is the type of question that we're looking for in this webinar. But a specific question such as, I'm trying to find the biological parents of James Brown, my 5th great grandfather who was adopted as a child, is not really something that we would have the time and possibly the expertise to answer in this webinar. But it's an important question. And so if you want to get help with a question like that, I would recommend trying an online consultation. And online consultations are available through the Salt Lake Family History Library. If you go to the Family Search Wiki and then you search for virtual research strategies sessions, you'll get a form where you can actually sign up for a free online consultation. How cool is that? And then also, we offer free consultations through the BYU Family History Library. And so if you'd like to arrange one of those, just email BYUFHLmissionaries@gmail or call this number on your screen. I sound like one of those, late night infomercials or something. Call the number on your screen, 801-422-3766. But they would be able to help arrange a free consultation for you. And I just got a thing on the screen that says Tammy Allred raised her hand. But Tammy, what is so crazy about this is it doesn't allow me to actually call on you. I just see a little message that you raised your hand. And I don't know if anybody else can see that either. But if you could put your question into either the Q&A or chat, then I can address that question after we've gone through the questions that were queued up. And then the other thing is too, if you have a question that Anna can answer, she's monitoring the chat and she may be able to help with those questions too. So let's go to question number 1. In Family Search historical records, can I search by role on the record, such as the principal or the father, mother, etc.? For those of you who might not be familiar with roles on records, I wanted to just explain that. So you see here, I've done a screenshot of a search in Family Search historical records, and I was looking for birth records of John Bescabee. You can actually see my search parameters up here. And here are some of the results I got. And you notice that the first two guys are listed as principal. And all that means is he's the main guy in the record. So, in other words, these are both christening records. Baptism is just an infant baptism or christening. And so, in both cases, this John Bescabee is the guy who got christened or baptized. And so that's why he's called the principal. But down here, this John William Bescabee appears as the father on the record. He's not the principal, and since this is a birth and christening, most likely this Alfred James Bescabee is the principal, and then John shows up as the dad, and Caroline shows up as the mom. And then same thing down here. This John Bescabee is not the principal, he's the father on the record. So our questioner wanted to be able to just search by the principal and not get all these other records where the person might be a father or a spouse or head of household for a census record or whatever. So I did some checking into that and discovered to my dismay that it's actually not possible at this time to search by role. And I could see that that would be very, very helpful. And I even checked with a very knowledgeable friend of mine, and she confirmed, she said, yeah, I have not seen a way to do this. I don't think it's possible. But you know what, you guys? I could totally see role fitting in this section right here because this allows you to restrict records. So you can restrict them by location. I only want records from England, or by type. I only want birth records or whatever. So how cool would it be to be able to restrict the record by role? Well, what I've noticed over the years, and maybe you guys have noticed this too, is that Family Search is so responsive to their users. I love that about them. And you'll notice at the bottom of just about any page on familysearch.org, there is a feedback link, and you can click that link to submit your idea. And so, what I would recommend to this questioner is that they click this feedback link. And when they do that, they're going to get a pop up on the screen. And this is actually a little bit of a new procedure. It used to be that you'd get a form you could fill out. Now you get guided over to the new Family Search communities. And I just checked it out today, and there is like this most amazing screen that you get where they have all these categories for user feedback. So you could submit feedback on the user interface, which this one, in my opinion, that's where that would fall. But there are a lot of other areas where you might want to submit feedback. So if you have a great idea for a new feature in Family Search, I would strongly recommend submitting that feedback. And I would just give two little bits of advice there. One is that sometimes I've looked at feedback that's been submitted, like on the old Get Satisfaction site, for example, and the feedback was not very clear. The person would just say something very vague about, oh, I wish you would do X. And they probably had the context in their mind, right? But for someone coming to it without any context, I could just imagine the guys at Family Search, the people at Family Search reading it and going, "Oh, we'd love to help you, but we're not really sure what you're asking." So be sure to include enough detail so that it's clear to somebody else what you're asking for, and maybe even a screenshot if you wanted to mock up something in Snagit or Photoshop or just any graphics program that you use, just to show what your idea is. The clearer you can make it, the more likely that they will be able to consider and hopefully implement it. The other thing that I wanted to comment on, again, going back to the old days of Get Satisfaction before the current forum that we have, the new Family Search communities, sometimes, oh my goodness, people would be so rude and so unkind. Like they would write a suggestion like the people at Family Search were idiots for not having implemented it yet. And I'm sure you've all seen that kind of feedback on forums or on Facebook or whatever, where people just get angry and go, "What were you thinking? You should have had this restrict by role." And I can't believe, and we got to keep in mind, okay, Family Search is providing this service to us for free. And there are a lot of talented and dedicated people trying to do a lot of wonderful things to serve the family history community. So I bet nobody on this webinar would ever leave a rude comment, right? But I just wanted to mention that just make your comments and your suggestions as kind and as gracious as possible, because I know if I were somebody that was looking at feedback for improvements to a system, I would probably be a lot more uh, open to that feedback if it was offered in a kind and collaborative spirit. And so those are just two suggestions for offering feedback to Family Search. Okay, question number 2. Sometimes sources appear on the details page that aren't on the sources page. And this questioner said, is there an easier way to add those sources back rather than deleting and adding them again? So this assumes that the sources were correct. And so we're going to go on that assumption for now, but we're also going to uh, talk about what if the sources weren't correct. So what the questioner is talking about, you might have noticed that on the details tab under other information, often you will see information that is related to sources. And so these right here are related to census sources, and this information was added when the census source was attached. So let's just look at how that was done, just in case you want a refresher on that. So this is a picture of the source linker screen. And we're adding a source right here, and there is a residence that goes along with the census source. If you click add here, this residence gets added to that other information section. Now, here's the interesting thing. So even though these two pieces of information are related, the 1911 census here and the on the source tab and the residents over here in the other information section, they are actually completely independent of each other, and deleting one doesn't delete the other. So in the example that this questioner gave, it sounds like somebody had gone to the source tab and they had deleted a source, but they had left the source information in the other information section. They might have assumed that it would be deleted, or they just didn't realize that it was there, or for whatever reason, though, they deleted the source off here and didn't delete it from here. Well, if the source was correct, the only way to get it back to the source tab is to re-add it manually. But the interesting thing about that, I just experimented with this today. If you re-add that source and you re-add the residence, this one does not get overwritten. It's going to add another entry for that same source, that same residence here. And so if you see that the residence is already here, but you want to add the census record back, then you don't want to choose to add the residence again. I hope that makes sense, but if it doesn't, please ask a follow-up question and we'll address that. So this question actually is a great segue, or the one we just did is a great segue into the next question, which is due to a bad merge, incorrect sources have been attached to somebody in family tree. How do I fix that? So that might sound like a really simple question, like, well, of course, if it's an incorrect source, you go in and detach it. But because it's a bad merge, it's actually not quite that simple. And so I'm really glad that the person asked this question because it gives us a chance to go through the two alternatives. So in the case of a bad merge, the first thing that you would want to do is repair that bad merge, because the way you have to repair the merge impacts how you correct the source. Let's look at that. So if no changes have been made since the bad merge, there's going to be an unmerge button, and you just click it and do the unmerge. And we'll look at an example in a minute. But if changes have been made since the merge, you can't use the unmerge feature. You've got to use the restore feature. So let's look at each of those. So the way you start both of them is to go into the change log. And the way that you do that is go to the page of the person with the bad merge, then look for the section called latest changes, and then click show all. And that will take you into the change log. So in this example, you notice, oh, I should say the change log is listed with the newest entries first. And so if there had been any changes since the merge, they would be listed above the merge. But you notice there aren't any. So the merge is right at the top of the change log, and there is an unmerge button. So you just click unmerge and you follow the prompts on the screen. What's so great about that is that both records are returned to their pre-merge state. In other words, it's as though the merge never happened. So to answer the questioner's question, all the sources are restored to the person they were on before the merge. So this is actually a best case scenario, excuse me, where you can undo the merge and all the sources go back exactly the way they were. But unfortunately, in my experience, this is there the unmerge button is only available maybe, I don't know, 2% of the time. Most of the time, people will have made changes since the bad merge, and so you have to go to option 2. So option 2 is to restore the deleted person. And Family Search actually makes it easy to tell which is which, because if changes have been made, there will not be an unmerge button. It only appears if no changes have been made since the merge. Well, you might be asking, why on earth does Family Search do that? Why don't they make it easy to just unmerge even if there have been changes? But think about it. If changes have been made since the merge, Family Tree has no way of telling where the changes apply. They might apply to one of the people, they might apply to both, or maybe neither. Maybe they're wrong. And so Family Tree just says, you know what? We don't know where to apply those changes if you're going to unmerge somebody. So instead, we're going to walk you through a different process. So let's take a look at that. Here is a record for Alice Simpson, and she has a bad merge on her. But notice that it is the fourth entry down. And since the bad merge was done, 3 additional changes were made. So since those changes were made after the merge, on the merge, there is no merge button. You've got the date, you've got the contributor whom I have grayed out, but there's no unmerge button. So let's walk through how you would restore that deleted person. First of all, you click the name of the deleted person and their summary card comes up. On the summary card, you can either click their name or you can actually click person. They both take you to the same place, which is the person page, but it's the deleted person page. So there's a banner here that lets you know that this person was deleted, and there's even a note that says that they were deleted by merge. And so to restore this person that was incorrectly deleted by merge, you click this restore person link over here. Now, when you do that, there's going to be a reason statement box pop up. And it's so important to put a helpful reason statement there to explain why you're undoing this merge, why you're restoring the person. In this case, the two girls were sisters, and they were born 2 years apart, and the older one had died before the younger one, and the parents had given the younger one the same name as the older sister. You may be familiar with that practice. It happened a lot the 1800s in England and prior, actually. I understand that it happened in Mexico a lot, in um, gosh, some European countries. So that was a practice of a lot of people, and you can see why that might lead somebody, if they were unfamiliar with that practice, to believe that the two sisters were the same person. But they definitely weren't. I found the burial record of the first one, and the two christening records were separate, etc. So it was really obvious that they were two different persons, as long as I had looked at the records that supported that. So I put a little explanation here, and then you just click restore, and that undeletes or restores that person that had been deleted by the merge. But here's where things get interesting. So the restored record goes back to its pre-merge state, sources and all, but the original surviving record is not altered except for temple ordinances, which are restored. So that's a good thing. But all the wrong sources that were there that were added are going to have to be removed manually. Family Search does not do anything to this record. And so, again, this is a little bit possibly counterintuitive. So, the restored record, in other words, the one that used to be deleted, goes back exactly the way it was before the merge. But the other one just stays the way it is. All the wrong information stays on it. So here's an example from this Alice that we just undid the bad merge on. Notice that she's got two christening records here. One is in 96, one is in 98. Well, this one is for her older sister, the one in 96. So in order to detach that source manually, this is what you do. You click view source. And when you do that, you get this little menu, and it's got a lot of options on it. The one we want to choose is detach. And when you do that, you get a pop-up screen that asks you to explain why you're detaching it. And I would just say something like, this source applies to Alice's older sister, who was also named Alice, but who died before this Alice was born. And then I would click detach, and that source would be detached. So anytime after you repair a bad merge through restoring a person, you always want to go to the surviving record and clean up any mistakes that you see. Okay, question number 4. This person wrote in and said, and I'm kind of summarizing this, but they said, years ago, I contributed many names to, and it was one of the older systems before Family Tree. But she says, now I'm working in Family Tree and I'm finding a ton of duplicates for people that I contributed years ago. Why is this happening? And that is such a good question. And in this, to answer this question, I want to not only address the question of why, because that's actually a pretty simple question, but what to do about it, what we can all do as users to try and avoid the ongoing problem with duplicates being added. Because I am finding, like, constantly new duplicates are being added to Family Tree, and there are ways that we can cut down on that. And so let's look first at the first answer, or the first answer to her question: why are there so many duplicates on these names that I added years ago? Well, the duplicates come from a number of sources. Let's look at where they come from. So the first place that duplicates came from, has to do with how the predecessors to family tree got started. And they were basically started from temple ordinances of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So the way that the predecessors to family tree got started is they started gathering all these temple ordinances into one repository. And it also included a lot of extracted vital records. If you're not familiar with extraction, it's just the old indexing program. So all these things were gathered into one place and they eventually got into Family Tree. Then also data from church membership records of members of the Church of Jesus Christ. Those are, that information is also fed into Family Tree. If you're living, only you can see it. But once you pass away, if you're a member of the Church of Jesus Christ, that some of the information from your membership record does become visible in Family Tree. And then the final source is user submissions. And this is probably the greatest source of duplication. You can see, though, that there is overlap among all the sources. And nobody well, I shouldn't say nobody because I actually did talk to a lady once who added duplicates on purpose. But most people don't add duplicates on purpose to family tree. It's usually accidentally. Actually, now that I say that, I can think of two people who intentionally added duplicates. And the time they intentionally added them, one lady thought that family tree was like having a private tree on Ancestry. So she was aware she was adding duplicates, but she thought she was adding them to quote her tree. And so in her mind, it wasn't a problem, which you can understand that, right? Because Ancestry and some other sites work on a different model, whereas Family Tree is a shared tree, which is it's really kind of a unique approach to family history. So one way or another, users may accidentally or intentionally add duplicates. Well, here's the thing. Family Tree does not catch all duplicates, and that is not a fault of Family Tree. And in order to explain that, I want to explain how duplicate matching works in Family Tree. Because if we don't understand how duplicate matching works, we're very likely not to find duplicates when there really are duplicates, and then we will add another duplicate to the system. So I hope that makes sense, you guys, but let's walk through this to see how duplicate matching works in Family Tree at a very high level. I mean, there's so much detail to this, right, on the programming end, but at a very high level, the duplicate function works simply by comparing information. If there's lots of information in common between two records, Family Tree will flag it as a duplicate. So here's an example. Notice these two John Bescabys. Any difference between these two records is really minor and inconsequential. We've got some abbreviations and some not abbreviations. We've got a different spelling on the mom's name. But it's pretty obvious to anybody looking at this that these two records really do represent the same human being. But if there's not a lot of information in common, Family Tree will not flag the two records as duplicates, even if they really do represent the same person. So here's an example. We've got our John that we just looked at, but over here we've got another duplicate for him that doesn't have a lot of information. It doesn't have any county, it's just got a country. It's only got an about year, and it's only got a dad, not a mom. So Family Search looks at this and goes, well, and I'm speaking as if I were a computer, right? So kind of giving the computer life. But the computer basically says, okay, a Family Search, I should say, Family Search, the system basically says, well, I'm looking at these two John Bescabys, and yeah, they might be the same person, but I don't really have enough information to tell for sure. So I am not going to flag them as duplicates. But they really are duplicates. Like the user, if they did a little bit of research, would see that these really are duplicates. Well, here's another very common example that I see in Family Tree of two records that are duplicates, but the system does not catch them because there's not much information in common. That is when you've got a person and you've got birth information and parent information, then you've got the same person over here, but they don't have birth information. They just have a spouse and they have kids. And so a person who researches would look at this and go, oh, I know that the same person who was the son of John and Eleanor married Jane Ellis. So I've done enough research to realize that their kid is the same person who married this woman. And so therefore I know they're duplicates and I can merge them. But Family Search, just going off the information that's here, does not have enough confidence to say that these are duplicates. So that's kind of some background um, context on the duplicate problem. In my experience in working in family trees since the beginning, actually, since it started in 2012 and working in the older systems, these are the three key reasons that duplicates get added. First of all, we've got wrong expectations of technology, and we kind of just went through that, right? If we believe that Family Tree is going to absolutely catch every duplicate, then if Family Tree doesn't catch it, then we're going to think that we're not adding a duplicate when we really are. So that's an issue right there. Another major one is not taking time to get to know the family. And so just think back to that last example. The reason I knew those two John Bescabys were the same is that I had done enough research to realize that the son of John and Eleanor was the person who married Jane Ellis. Now, let me just make a quick comment right there. Research has gotten a bad rap over the years, which I think is so unfortunate. But I can see why too, because research used to mean driving to a library, scrolling through microfilm, writing to a courthouse, all these lengthy, difficult processes. Now, what do we do for research? We click a few buttons and we get like decades worth of censuses. We get birth records. We get everything at our fingertips from many of the people that we're researching. And so it's now so easy to research many of our families. It might take like a half an hour to look over, excuse me, to look over those people in the census records and look at the birth records for the kids and marriage records so that you realize who the kids married and you realize that, oh, those really are duplicates. So for a small investment of time in getting to know that family, you can avoid adding duplicates. And then the last reason, which I think is actually probably one of the most serious ones, but I also see this changing, which I think is really great, but that is rushing too fast or equating numbers with success. So you might have heard people say, oh, wow, I added 1,000 names to Family Tree, as if that is a measure of their worth or their value or their contribution. And I hope that we can move away from that and realize that it's of probably a lot greater value to add somebody and connect with them and and do the work accurately. And it would be better to do like 5 people that way than 10,000 people the other way, where there's a lot of errors and a lot of problems. I don't know where we get the idea that family history is a race. It doesn't need to be. It's not a race to get as many people as possible into the tree. Rather, family history, it's a matter of connection. It's a matter of getting to know our families and bonding with them. And for members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, doing those sacred temple ordinances. So, as we consider these reasons why duplicates happen, then that kind of gives us some clues for what we can do to avoid duplicates. So here are, oh, I forgot. I had an extra little screen that I wanted to pop in here. I added it late in the game. So the one thing I did want to point out here is that it can take maybe just a few minutes to add some duplicates, but it can take many times longer to fix those duplicates. And one of the major reasons for that is that Family Tree is a shared tree. So if you add a duplicate, it doesn't just affect you. it affects every other user who can see that duplicate. And if they don't know the family very well, they can start building a tree on that duplicate, and maybe you're building a tree on a different one. And so, or vice versa, I guess, for this example. And so then they add a bunch of duplicate kids, and then maybe some people come along and do bad merges and so forth. Once you get errors into the system in a shared tree, they tend to snowball. And so it's so worth our time to do that little bit of due diligence. And I should add here too, I'm not talking about professional level research. I'm not a professional genealogist. I'm just someone who loves family history and and cares about doing it right. And I'm guessing that most of you are in the same boat there. Like I Most of the people I help in my stake really care about accuracy. They want to do it right. And so we want to avoid these duplicates because those errors just snowball. And the trouble is, if we don't recognize the duplicate or the error, most likely it's going to fall to someone else to clean up. And so that's just part of being a good citizen of Family Tree is doing our best to contribute valid information and accurate information. Now, I don't want anybody to go to the other extreme and say, oh my gosh, so now I'm going to be really paranoid because I have to be perfect and I better not do anything unless I'm perfect. And that's not what I'm saying either. We want to get in and we want to do the work, but we don't want to be careless. We want to be careful and do our due diligence. So we want to find that sweet spot where we don't expect perfection of ourselves, but we also don't excuse ourselves in being careless. So I hope that helps explain that. And then on to the tips for avoiding duplication. The first tip is take time to know the family that you're working on. And again, with the resources that we have nowadays, this can often be done without a very big investment in time. Then also, oh my goodness, this is such an important one. So many of the errors that I see in Family Tree come because somebody relied on just one source, in particular censuses. But censuses are known to be particularly error prone. People lie about their age. Neighbors give information which is incorrect. So often, when I find errors in Family Tree and somebody has just attached a census, I can look at that census and see the mistakes in the census and the mistakes on the person. And it just is very clear that the errors came because that person only used one source. So you never want to add a record only relying on one source, if at all possible. You always want to try and find other sources that corroborate that source and that also help you to kind of ferret out those errors if there are any errors. Another thing, okay, and this is just me, you guys, this is not any official guidance, but I found that when you go one by one, rather than trying to do like mass contributions, so adding a GEDCOM of 1,000 people, or very quickly without checking, adding all the kids from a census or something like that. That those are times when errors are ripe to happen. And I've just found that if I go person by person and carefully validate each one, then it really truly does save me time in the long run. And it helps me connect with them. And so again, I mentioned this one time in another class, and one brother mentioned, he said, well, gosh, I use JetCom and I am very careful. And yes, if you're very careful when you when you add a lot of names, that is awesome. But what I found is that a lot of times when people are adding huge numbers of names to the tree, they're actually not being very careful. They're kind of rushing through to get that huge number of names added. So the point here, for me, it works better to go by one, go wait, let me say that again. Take two. For me, I found it works better if I go person by person, one by one, add the sources, make sure I've got it right. But your work method of working may be different, and you may be very comfortable with, say you wanted to add 1,000 people to family tree, and before you did it, you went through and very, very carefully validated them, made sure the information was correct, and then as you added them, you checked very carefully for duplicates. That works too. My point is just to be careful and not to rush, and just be sure that we're doing our best to be accurate. And the last thing I wanted to point out is to, for those of us who are people of faith, I would say, because I realize our audience comes from all over the place. So whether you're a person of faith where that's an important part of your life, or whether you're not, it really doesn't matter. We just speak of things in different terms. So if you're a person of faith, you might say, listen to the spirit. If you're not, you might say, listen to intuition or instinct. But what I found is if I listen to that inner voice, it helps me find duplicates. And so that is one thing that I feel is really, really valuable in avoiding adding duplicates to family tree. Okay, we are to the last question here, and then we're going to go to the questions contributed by participants right on the webinar. So this person said, due to circumstances beyond my control, I have not actively contributed to Family Search for about 3 years. Where should I begin the catch up process? And I would bet that there's a lot of people who can relate to that. Illness can take a toll, maybe children with special needs, all kind of reasons can keep us from family history for a time. So what are some things that we could do if we've had to be away for a while? Excuse me. One thing is just what you're doing today. So take advantage of free webinars at the BYU FHL. We offer Sunday classes that are on beginning and intermediate family search. So everybody is welcome to attend those. And there's many other places that give free webinars. The Salt Lake Library, I believe Ancestry.com has some free things. I believe they have some paid things, but if I'm not mistaken, they also have some free classes. And then also check out what's new at Family Search on the Family Search blog. Another suggestion is to just go ahead and dive in, but to do it thoughtfully. And so if you feel uncomfortable with something or you think, ooh, I might be about to make a mistake, that's the time that you can check with a friend or check with a consultant or something. So don't be afraid to dive in, but definitely do it with some care. And then the final suggestion there would be to check out the Family Search community, the new community, which there are so many people there that can give great advice on any questions that you might have. So that brings us to the end of these questions. And I'm going to, or the pre-submitted questions, I should say, and I'm going to open up the Q&A and take a drink because I'm kind of losing my voice here. Okay, so let's see what questions we've got from our wonderful participants. So Joseph says, I found out recently that someone who has been entered as a brother to my grandfather is actually not his brother, but a relative of some sort. What steps do I take to correct the record? Oh my goodness, Joseph, great question because I've seen that a lot in Family Tree where people get added. This is actually one I've seen from census records because relationships are not always right in the census, and it might say son, but it's really a grandson, or it might say, brother-in-law, but it's really something different. So anyway, that you will, when you run into that problem, what you do, you know what? Let me see if I can just flip over to Family Tree and actually show you how you can detach that person. Okay, this is not letting me over, probably because I'm clicking the wrong stuff. Let's go back here and I'm going to get out of there we go. Okay, so I'm going to sign into Family Tree. And let's just say, for the sake of example, that this guy, that there was a wrong person here. Let's say that let's see, Ted, let's say to the questioner's question is that we've got a wrong sibling here, right? Let me just go back and make sure that that was the question. Yes, so we've got a wrong sibling here. What you would do is click let's just say for the sake of this example that Ellen was the wrong sibling. You would click the pencil next to Ellen, and then you would click. So since she is not the daughter in this example of either of these parents, you would click remove or replace right next to, and you know what I just realized, you guys, if you can't see this, will somebody say something in the chat? Because one time I was doing a screen share and I did this big long explanation and nobody could see it. And so if I'm not sharing the screen correctly, please somebody say so in the chat if you can't see what I'm talking about. But in this example, if we wanted to disconnect Ellen as a child in this family, we would click remove or replace. And that would bring us to this screen where we have to say, yes, I have reviewed the relationships and sources. And then you would either remove the parents, or if you knew the right parents, you would replace the parents. I'm not going to do that here because this was just for illustration purposes. But if I went ahead with this, I would get a screen that would let me explain why I'm making this change. So Joseph, that's what you would want to do with that brother who was incorrectly listed as the brother of your relative. And there was one other comment I wanted to make about that, and that is that somebody made this mistake, probably with the best of intentions. So, what I often like to do is I will go to my record and I'll try to add more information and sources, but then I'll also go to the other record that was wrongly connected to my family. And I'll also do a little bit of research there and add enough information and sources so that it's easy to tell that that other person doesn't belong in my family. So, Joseph, that's a recommendation, not required by any means, but it might prevent somebody from putting that person back into your family incorrectly. Okay, so I'm going to cancel out of that and let's go back into the Q&A. So M. Lowe said, would it be better to try unmerging an incorrect merge first in beta and then do it in the real family tree? Oh, wait, okay, this is really weird. The screen refreshed and the question was different. So the question I just read is actually not M. Lowe's question. So it changed rows on me. So going back to M. Lowe's question, they said, how would you request having a cemetery standardized that appears not to be a choice at the time? Would this be a feedback question to submit? My understanding is yes. I say that with a little bit of hesitation because there is a place name site and I, let's see if places, family search places. Oh, it's not coming up for me. Let's just try that though and see. Okay, I've got to drag the Zoom thing out of the way, you guys. Sorry, it's blocking the screen here. Okay, family search places. So this is actually a real, yes, okay, it is there. So actually, MLO, I take back what I said. You probably could submit it to communities, but I would think that this would probably be a better place to submit it. And so you would go to familysearch.org. I got to drag the Zoom thing out of the way. familysearch.org/research/places. This is actually one of my favorite sites. I love this thing because you can search like any place here. And I know I won't go into a lot of detail because this wasn't your question, but you can like just put in, suppose I said Amstelveen, where I used to live in the Netherlands, Amstelveen, Holland. So suppose I wanted to learn more about that. You can just search any place in the world and find out information about it. But to your question, MLO, you would click suggest a new place, and then you could say, hey, I noticed that this cemetery isn't in. I have relatives buried here, and I'd really like it to be added. So great question. Okay, I'm going to mark that one answered. And now we get to K.S. Schultz's question. And their question was, would it be better to try unmerging an incorrect merge first in beta than to do and then do it in the real family tree? And I agree with that. I think that is a really good approach. For those of you who might not be aware of what beta is a playground. Basically, it's a play version of the real family search. So the real family search is www.familysearch.org, of course, but the beta version is beta familysearch.org. So if you go there, you can log in with your same credentials. So you don't have to get any, different login or anything. Just log in the same way you usually do. But in beta, you can make any kinds of changes without affecting the live system. So that is actually where I prefer to go, like KS Schultz, to experiment with undoing bad merges. And then once I'm sure that I'm going to undo them correctly, then I go back to the live system and then I undo them there. So I hope that helps answer that question. And I'm so glad that you brought that up. Okay, Sarah says, what are the advantages of using a different username for beta family search? Oh, yes, Sarah. She remembered that I said in a past webinar, I used a different username for beta. Honestly, it was just to avoid confusing myself so that I would realize, oh, if I see this other username, I realize that I'm really in beta. So that's really the only reason that I did that. Sarah, thanks for asking that question. Okay, another question from M. Lowe. When duplicates are suggested in family tree, should we look at the duplicates to resolve them or leave them for others who may be a closer living relative? So that is also a really good question. All kinds of things come up when you're working in a shared tree, right? That you might not deal with in a private tree. The thing about the shared tree is that actually anybody is welcome to work on anything. So I'll tell you, Emlo, the reason or the reasoning, I guess, that I go by is if I think it's a duplicate that would be very simple for someone else to resolve and Family Search has flagged it, then I'm inclined to leave it for, especially if I'm not a close relative. I'm inclined to leave that for someone else. But if it looks like a tricky duplicate, or it looks like it really isn't a duplicate, or that there's some issue or problem with it, then I will go in and try and resolve it, just because to kind of spare other people from having to deal with the problems, because dealing with merges is such a difficult part of working in family tree. So that's kind of how I decide, is if it looks really simple, I'll leave it for somebody else to do. But if it looks like it's going to be hard and tricky, then I'll usually try to go in and figure it out um, and resolve it. So thank you for that question. Okay, Betty says, will the portal, including premium websites, be unavailable to family history centers for 90 days? And Betty, I actually don't work in a family history center. I am a volunteer with the Family History Library. I have a full-time different job. And so I apologize that I don't know the answer, but if anybody on the call on the webinar today knows that answer, if you're a director at an FHC or a worker there, could you please post a note in the chat or the Q&A to help Betty with that question? So thank you. Okay, another question from Terrell, or I should say a question from Terrell. When correcting a bad merge and detaching sources, I recommend clicking Review Attachments. In the case of the sister who died, it is then much easier to get the christening source attached to the right sister. By clicking the Change button in black, then it is called Change Focus Person. Then I can use the ID to reattach the source to the correct sources. I have lost sources simply by clicking detach. So Terrell, that is a good suggestion. And I actually haven't done that a lot. So let me try to restate what I believe you're saying. And if I'm not saying it right, please correct me. So I go into review it. I go to that wrong source. It's currently attached to the younger sister. I click review attachments and I see that it's clicked to the wrong sister. And then or I see there that it's on the wrong sister. And then I change the focus. And for those of you who might not be familiar, shoot, you know what? I bet I can bring this up really quickly. Let me go back to TED. Okay, and so then when I go in here to TED, I'm going to just pretend I'm going to attach this source. And up here, right now, the focus, so to speak, is on Ted. He's the primary person that we're dealing with. But I can change it. Well, I don't think I can on this record, actually. It's one of the records that doesn't allow it. But a lot of records do allow you to change the focus person. So you can change the focus person both on the record and on family tree. So Terrell, what I understand you to say is you'd come in here and you'd change the focus to the other sister, and then it would, if I'm remembering right, you'd get an error message here and it would say, hey, this source is attached to someone else. And then you could very easily change that source over to the right sister. And if I did not understand you correctly, please post a follow up. But if that's what you meant, I think that is brilliant. And that sounds like a much better way than I had recommended in the webinar, so that you wouldn't lose that source. Because the way I recommended was detach and then attach manually. And yeah, what if it didn't show up as a recommended source on the other sister, or I didn't know how to find it, or whatever? So, Terrell, thank you for making that recommendation. I agree that's a much better way to do it. Oh, Terrell posted in the Q&A that that was correct. So good. I'm glad I understood it correctly. Okay, we've got another question from Debbie, another question, and it is from Debbie. She said, my husband passed recently. I'm so sorry, Debbie. My husband passed recently, and my daughter's in family tree. It shows him as alive under a duplicate, but in mine, it is listed that he passed. How do I correct the duplicate of him where one says he's passed and one says he's living? Debbie, that is such a good question. And it's also a very common issue in family tree. So, years and years ago, back in the days of, well, it might have been at the very beginning of Family Tree, and I believe it was definitely true in new.familysearch.org before Family Tree, and that was that there were essentially no privacy controls. So you could see other living people in Family Tree. Well, Family Search, understandably, had users express concern about that. So then Family Tree made living people private. But in the old system, there was often only one copy of a living person. So who got it? Did Debbie get it or did the daughters get it? Well, everybody needed it, right? So Family Tree, this is just one example. Family Tree actually created duplicates, and this would apply to members of the church. So Family Tree would create those. They'd probably leave the primary record as a spouse to Debbie, and then they would create duplicates for the daughters, and they would have different ID numbers. So now, Debbie, what the daughters need to do is go into each of their copies of their dad, mark him deceased, and then he's going to show up. Those copies are going to show up in the live system, and you'll want to go in quickly and merge those duplicate copies into your record, because it sounds like yours is the primary record. It's got the death information on it, and I'm guessing it probably has the ordinances attached. And so have your daughters mark the other copies deceased and have them either give you the PIDs, the ID numbers of the duplicates, or you give them your copy, your ID number of your copy of your husband. And then however you do it, you would want to make sure that those records, let's see, it didn't say how many daughters you have. I don't know why I assumed you had three. Like, I don't know where that came from. But anyway, however many daughters you have, however many copies there are, is you would want to merge those copies. So I hope that helps you guys. Sorry, I feel like I kind of stumbled on that one. I hope that was clear. So that is all the questions in the Q&A. And Anna, can I ask, I haven't been monitoring the chat, but are there any questions that we need to address in the chat? Oh, and we just got another one in the Q&A. So, oh, Debbie says yes, that answered her question. So, but Anna, are there other questions that we need to address from the chat?
Yes. So Tammy Allred asked, do you know when we can share our live family members with our immediate family? A few years ago at Roots Tech, John Tanner said it was coming. Just wondering and hoping it's soon.
Yes. Do you know what? Ron has been saying that every year for, gosh, I want to say probably the last 4 or 5 years. He's been saying that it's coming, and I'm not accusing Ron of lying. Ron is amazing, he's wonderful, and it is coming. It just hasn't maybe come as fast as some of us would have liked, because I agree that'll be a really cool feature. So I have not heard any update on that, but what I would recommend doing is going to Facebook and going to Family History Run. So I'm going to Family History Run, and he gives Q&As. So if you are on Facebook and you search for Family History Ron, he does live Q&As, I believe once a month. I want to say they're monthly, and he takes just questions from the audience. So that would probably be your best source for finding out if there's a date for this great new feature, or if it's still just in the development stages. So thanks for that great question. Oh, I see another question in the Q&A. Oh, Terrell says that I'm assuming Terrell is male. I apologize if not, but I'm saying he's getting the same 90-day no portal access message at his center. So I'm not familiar with why that might be happening, but it does sound like multiple people are getting that message that for 90 days there will be no portal access at family history centers. So shoot, that sounds a little rough. I would not want to go without that for 90 days, but we do what we got to do, right? Anna, are there any other questions that need to be addressed from the chat?
There's another one about the portal thing happening in 90 days, but I take it that's been answered.
Okay.
Let's see. So Terrell said, when correcting a bad merge and detaching sources, I recommend clicking. Oh, this is a recommendation. I'll read it anyways. Sources, I recommend clicking review attachments. In the case of the sister who died, it is then much easier to get the christening source reattached to the correct sister.
Oh, perfect. Then he also put that in the Q&A. So perfect.
Cool.
That one's been addressed. Thank you.
Awesome. And then that's it.
Okay. Well, everybody, thank you so much for coming to our webinar today. I hope you found that helpful. If you did, maybe put a note in the chat if you'd like to see more webinars like this in the future with Q&As. But I think that wraps up for today, and thank you so much. I'll turn the time back to Anna.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you will join us for our next webinar, which will be on July 7th on getting the most out of MyHeritage DNA with James Baker. A recording of this webinar will be made available later in this week, and you can view that on our YouTube channel or on our website. If you have any comments or questions, you can always email us at fhl_webinars@byu.edu or follow Facebook and Twitter. Thank you and have a wonderful week.